Welcome into the Think Deeper podcast. I am your co-host, Joe Wilkie, here with Jack and Will yet again. And fellas, before we get into what I think is going to be a great episode, something I'm excited about, how was the weekend? What did you guys do over the weekend?
Whole family got sick. Finally, 2 years in, got COVID. I think you guys have both had your bouts, right?
A couple of them.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, I dodged it all this time. But yeah, a lot of sleeping. I didn't preach. Had a rare Sunday off, but not exactly for vacation purposes. But
not a great weekend. It doesn't sound like.
No, not my favorite weekend ever. But we survived.
Will, how about you?
I had a better weekend than Jack. It sounds like. We had 3 of our seniors, or actually 4 of our seniors, at Decatur last night. We had their graduation big ceremony after worship, and really, really cool night, real special.
Nice.
You know, with the slideshows and the pictures and the music, you know, there were tears shed for sure, but that was exciting. Also shot my lowest round of golf I've ever shot over the weekend. So that was rather exciting.
Mine.
It was. I'm not going to reveal what the score was. Just
you have to. The listeners got to know.
I don't think so. Maybe when I can break 90, then I'll give the score.
Hey,
but
par golf is pretty
good. It was a good weekend.
Now,
how about you, Joe?
You had a baby false alarm, didn't you?
Yeah, I did indeed. Which made for fun, actually. Will, we were gonna drop the brothers, my 2 sons, off at your family's house. Got to see your brother play flag football, his last flag football game of the season.
Nice.
So we were just kind of chilling. Like, man, we thought we were gonna have to run in, and then it was kind of, we were put on hold for a second, and the contractions were coming steadily. Then they weren't, and then they were coming steadily. And so we're like, well, we'll go chill at your house, and when you guys get back after the game. So we went to the game and then left early, and we were waiting, and then they just stopped, and we drove home, and it was late, probably pushing 11 p.m. And so we thought that was it. I was calling off clients, everything else. That's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, it's how it goes. Otherwise, my dad came in, and we've had a real good weekend and ate some good food, and so it's been good to see him. Missing the fact that my mom's not here, but yeah, next time. So anyway, with that though, let's get into the episode. Will, take us away.
So the topic for today's episode is one that is much needed. It is one that is really becoming, I say becoming, it's been a challenge for Christians for, decades upon decades. And it's the topic of internet pornography. And again, this is a very needed topic. This is something that obviously the world has become saturated in, but this is something that's leaked into the church, and it's something that a lot of congregations, to put it quite frankly, are not addressing. You know, we're not addressing how do we deal with internet pornography addiction among Christians. We're not addressing how do we combat it. To me, personally at least, it seems like a lot of the responses that we get from congregations and ministers and just the way that the church has been handling it is, let's just pretend like it doesn't exist. You know, maybe we'll casually mention it every now and then, but, you know, that's a touchy topic, that's a sensitive topic, so let's stay as far away from that as we possibly can. And, you know, we don't think that's wise and that's healthy. And so that's something that we want to address with today's episode is several things. We're going to look at just some common questions that people have regarding internet pornography. For the average man, you might say. Obviously, we're going to tackle it from an individual perspective, going to tackle it from a parental perspective. But, you know, before we really get into that, we need to, you know, state very clearly that this is an issue that can affect everybody. This is not something that's isolated to teenagers. This is not something that's isolated to just males. Obviously, statistically, males struggle with it more. But this is something that, you know, it stretches across all ages. Again, this is not just teenagers that are dealing with this. And so I'm going to kick it to Joe as we get started. As far as, Joe, how bad is it when you talk about pornography? Because again, to hear some congregations' response to it, or lack of response to it, I should say, there might be quite a few people out there that don't think it's really that big of a deal, that don't think that it's as widespread as it is, that people don't struggle with it near as much as we might say that they do. So why don't you kind of give us kind of a rundown on just how bad it's gotten, that is, you know, the pornography industry and pornography addiction, especially among the world and within the church?
Yeah, I think the answer is real bad. It's real bad. I got a few stats here just for our listeners. Around 12% of all web pages are pornographic. The average age of first exposure is now 11 years old. I know kids that have been exposed as early as 6 years old, kids that claim to be addicted or are regularly viewing it by 7 and 8 years old. And as far as the age, you mentioned the age, Will, I have clients into their 70s that are sex addicts that struggle with porn addiction. So with that being the case, yeah, it's pretty bad. As many as 93.2% of boys and 62.1% of girls will view porn before 18. To me, I think 93% is low. I don't know of any kid that has not seen or come across porn in some way before 18. And one of the issues I guess that you get into is you have to define what porn is. Is that hardcore pornography? Is that softcore pornography? And I take pornography to be any sexually arousing image. Well, if you take that, then everybody has it. You watch a trailer for a movie, or you're driving down the road and you look at a billboard, and that technically is what we might consider softcore pornography because it is a sexually arousing image. So when you take it that way, I think it's really bad. But for the porn industry, I think the annual revenue is more than the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. It also has more combined revenue than ABC, CBS, and NBC. You're talking in the billions. And why? Well, because 25%
And that's for
of search
something
engine
that's
requests,
free. It can be found
Correct.
free everywhere, and yet it's still bringing in that much money.
25% of search engine requests are related to sex, 1 in 4. So yeah, there's a ton of money associated with this in terms of ad revenue. Jack, you just said it, like it's free, and yet they're still bringing in this much because of all the paid content. The subscription base, they've gone to subscription from what I understand as much as anything else. OnlyFans, things like that, that's bringing in millions and millions. So the problem is really bad. And just a few more stats for on the personal level. Around 1 in 3 Americans seek it out at least once a month. That's 100 million people, over 100 million people. 51% of all Americans seek out porn at least occasionally, over half. And 11% American males view porn every single day. 11% over 1 in 10. And this is the one that really catches people's eyes. 33% of women watch pornography videos or view explicit photos at least one time per week. 33% of women. So you go, well, this is a male issue. No, not really. What we're seeing is that number is very much on the rise, and 1 in 3 are viewing it regularly.
And that's
And
to not
basically
even get
1 in
into
2.
the literary stuff, 50 Shades of Grey kind of stuff as well. That's not even really tracked by those kinds of things.
That's the visual, and that's the interesting thing is women are not really wired visually. God wired men to be visual, but this is the way that the culture's moving. Is it's sexualizing kids and sexualizing women, girls at a much younger age, and making this it's making it obviously very accessible and more exciting to them. And there's multiple things, and we're going to get into that as to why that is the case, and obviously how we can get out of it and such, but also attaching that to shame.
Well, and Jack, I'm not sure if you were going to get into this or not, but that's something I was going to bring up is just how much more accessible it's become. 30 years ago, before all of us had, smartphones and basically mini computers in our pocket, it was a lot more difficult to access. You hear about the brown paper bag type of thing. Go into the sleazy bookstore, come out with a brown paper bag. A lot of people probably still have that image of, well, that's the pornography, the Playboy magazines, that type of thing. It's become so much more accessible again for 10-year-olds, for 11-year-olds, for 12-year-olds who unfortunately are having, they've got a computer in their pocket 24/7. They've got privacy with it. It's a lot of the stuff that we discussed with previous episodes about, the internet and keeping ourselves safe and keeping kids safe on the internet. But I think, Joe, your stats that might sound alarming for people as far as just how many truly seek it out, how many are truly looking at it. A symptom of that is simply because it literally is so accessible for every hour of the day with your smartphone, with your computer, with the privacy that we've got. And so that's an issue, and that's something that, again, we wanted to address with this episode because it's gotten so much worse over the last 5-10 years, especially for young people.
We're going to get into this later in the episode of some myths. One of the things, though, that drives me nuts is when you have some older members of the congregation, elders and such, well, those perverts just need to stop.
I literally,
no
you're
idea.
not exaggerating. I literally heard that at a preacher's meeting. That somebody was addressing this, speaking on this subject of how we can address it in our churches, and that was what he said. You just need to tell those perverts to stop watching that stuff.
And statistically,
imagine,
50% or 66% of men in that room are struggling with it.
Yeah, just even among ministers, there were people there that, just as you said, statistically, it's a guarantee. And now imagine that you get up and preach a sermon like that. You just stop looking at it, perverts. That guy's never confessing sin to anybody because that's what he's going to be labeled as.
And when you consider that these are the people that grew up and Playboy was the worst thing they had to combat, they don't know the world of AOL. They don't know tube sites. They don't know social media and how much that pushes pornography. They don't know the millions of web pages that are that get kids at a young age where they slightly change the URL from something that is, I think it's safe to say here because I think they changed this, but whitehouse.com was a porn site for a long time. How many kids researching a paper, trying to figure out something about the president and White House would go there and get hooked on porn? They don't understand the risks that are out there, and so when they tell people that, well, you just need to stop, they also don't understand the addictive nature to this, but how easily accessible this is for kids and everybody else.
Let me ask this question, because this is one that a lot of, again, we're going to address this from an individual perspective too. So don't hear this question and think, well, they're just kind of talking to parents here. No, this is for everybody. But this is a question that a lot of people have when it comes to the strategy for, keeping your kids, I guess you could say, safe from pornography. There's kind of two sides to it. As far as one strategy is you do everything in your power to keep them from it. Just make up your mind. I'm going to keep them from viewing pornography. It's just not going to happen. And then there's the other side of the camp that kind of says, look, with as accessible as it is today, with how many opportunities that they have to see it, it's going to be nearly impossible, if not 100% impossible, to keep them from viewing it. So rather than making our strategy, how do we keep them from it, we need to more so tailor the strategy to, we need to teach them how to handle it. And again, I want to kick it to you two as far as, which side of the camp you fall more on. I think we'd all agree it's probably a little bit of both. It's not like you want to just stick pornography in front of them and say, okay, now this is how you handle it. But at the same time, we just talked about how accessible it is and how easy it is for kids to find it and get into it as early as 10, 11 years old. And so, guys, again, I'll kick it to you. As far as for parents, what's the strategy here? Do we take more of the let's do everything we can to keep them from it approach, or more of the, okay, we know they're going to come across it at some point, let's teach them this is how you handle it, this is what you do whenever you do stumble across it? What's the strategy here?
I think not just for parents as well, because this is something that Joe and I are pretty open about. We both had this struggle. This is something growing up just hit us like a train because we weren't prepared for it. That when you've got that brain, even as somebody who doesn't want to do it, you're going to set up all those walls for yourself to keep yourself from it. But if that desire is strong enough, you're still going to find it. Or, as Joe was talking about a bit ago, even just accidentally stumbling across it. You can set up all kinds of safeguards and still end up in the wrong place. And so as individuals, you can look at it that way. But as parents, the same thing of set up as many walls as possible to keep your kids safe from these things. But also realize there's not enough walls. You cannot perfectly seal your house of all the cracks to be airtight. Because it is unavoidable in this day and age. I'm fairly certain to say that somebody can make it, 18 years, however long your kid is in your house, without somehow coming across it. I mean, obviously, if you don't have any screens, anything like that whatsoever, but it's a really hard thing to do. But it's, on the other hand, it's kind of, your kids maybe are going to get tempted with drugs. I think all three of us have been around, friends through sports or whatever else who just drugs. That they got old enough and that's what they went to. It made perfect sense for our parents to take steps to make sure, that was not something we were going to get into, but also when we're around people who are, that will know the right thing to do. It's a bury your head in the sand kind of thing to think, I'll shelter them perfectly forever. And so you prepare them for that moment and set them up with what to do and how to navigate it when they do. But you also at least do your best to keep that distance there to the best of your ability as well. I think, Joe, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would mirror both of you, and specifically what Will said in terms of, do you keep them from it or do you teach them how to handle it? And the answer is very much both. You have to understand the addictive nature of this, because there's a lot of people, and you'll see this on, Reddit has certain threads and such dedicated to this, and of guys getting out of pornography, and there's a strong case to be made for no software blockers, no accountability, things like that, that it really is, if you want to get out of it, then you need to have the self-control to get out of it, and that's the only way you'll know, because otherwise, as soon as these blockers are removed, you'll go right back to it. And granted, there's a little bit to that I understand, that this should be something that
the philosophical differences between teach a kid to swim, give them floaties, teach them these things, or throw them in the deep end and let them figure it out, kind of
Right.
There's some danger to that. It might not be the best strategy, but a lot of people learn to swim that way. So maybe there's something to it at some level.
Yeah, I think there's something to it. I would not agree with it though. And here's how I would back that, or why I would say that. This is highly addictive, and it really, once you get into the addiction, it's not about self-control. It's more about it would basically be like putting an alcoholic in a at a bar or in a liquor store and saying, well, self-control, just stay away from it. You say you'd never do that because you want to stay from it as far as possible, because this is an addiction, and when the cravings hit, and when and specifically I take it be trauma and such, and I won't get into all that stuff, but when a trauma capsule is triggered, then they run toward porn, and it really has nothing to do with self-control, because the brain, the part of your brain, the pathway that says, hey, let's stop and think about it, actually shrinks during porn addiction. They have proven this. So I don't think it's real smart to just throw them to the deep end. So in that way, I would say keep yourself from it as much as possible. Put those accountability. We'll get. We keep saying we're going to get into all this stuff. Truly, I think it'll be a good episode. We got a lot of stuff to cover, but put that accountability software on the computer. But also, specifically to the parents, you need to be the expert in your kid's life. When they run across it, not if, but when they run across it, they need to be coming to you saying, hey, I ran across this on the internet. This is how I got it. You shut that down. Don't freak out, because that tells the kid, this is really bad. Don't tell my parents again. Say, thank you for telling me. Appreciate the fact that they came to you, and handle it that way. So I think that's one of the best things parents can do.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is keep the communication channels open, right? We talk about the accountability partners and things that help the individuals, and part of what helps the individual when it comes, as far as the accountability stuff goes, is because you are communicating about it. You're being open about it. It's not something that you're just burying, and trying to just, keep everything under wraps and don't let anybody know about it. If your kid doesn't have the confidence that he or she can come to you and talk to you about these things, hey, I searched whitehouse.com and I stumbled across this. If they don't have the courage to be able to come to you and tell you that, then they're probably going to be engaging in behaviors without you knowing that, you don't want them to, because you don't have those communication channels open. And it's embarrassing for kids. I mean, nobody is necessarily going to want to come and tell their parents, but you have to some extent, as far as that second half of the puzzle goes, teaching them how to handle it. I think you do have to acknowledge the fact that, especially once you start giving them privileges, and when they get older, and especially when they go off to college, if you've kept them from it that long, it is going to be kind of like an avalanche that's going to hit them when they leave the house, as far as all the things that are available. And so again, I'm not saying you need to stick it in front of them or anything like that, but you need to be having the conversations. You need to be talking to them about it, and not just trying to put them in a bubble, or and then say you're not going to know what this is. You're never. We have a camp that we go to, or that I'm a counselor for, a Little Mountain Ministry Camp, and it's just for guys. It's for guys that are from age 10 up to 100. It's for adults, kids as well. But I vividly remember we talk about pornography addiction at this camp, and there's 10-year-olds there, there's 11-year-olds there, and we've had parents that I guess didn't know that we talked about that in classes or what, and they were upset and said, my kid doesn't know what that is. They're not familiar with that. They're not going to know. And we had to tell those parents, literally every single one of them, when we brought this up, they knew what it was. They were very aware of it. They knew that not necessarily that they had seen it, but that they knew what it was, and that they were very aware of it. And so I think that's part of the problem as well. We just don't have an accurate grasp of just how much kids are exposed to it now. And so I think that's a big issue as well.
And let me say this real fast. I think there's a lot of dads that are struggling with this, that I think don't want to talk to their kids about it, or that it's
because then they'd have to address it themselves.
Correct. You put all that software on the computer, things like that. They may have it for themselves, but I think it keeps them from really wanting to bond with their kid over this, because they'd have to admit, I struggle with pornography, to their 13-year-old. Well, nobody really wants to have to admit that to their 13-year-old. So let's just kind of, we'll talk about it a little bit. I'll check in with you from time to time. We'll read a book together, Every Young Man's Battle, and see how that goes. Most of the time, that doesn't fix the issue, doesn't help. Every Young Man's Battle is great for bouncing your eyes, for some behavioral things. That's not all there is to it. But if you're a dad out there who is struggling with it, the best thing you can do for your family is get yourself some help. Get out of this addiction. go seek some counseling, go get some strong accountability partners, get in some groups, some SA, Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, SAA, Samson Group, or Samson Society rather. There are things like that you can really get into, plug into. Help your family by helping yourself, and don't bury your head in the sand, please, with teaching your kids how to handle it. But I want to move on here to the next one.
No, hold on. We wanted to also make note that there's a lot more to this, and we want to get more practical. We don't have time right now to get into the practical of keep them safe and, prepare them. There's practical things to do about that, about what to put on your computer, what to look out for, what behaviors, what conversations to have preemptively, what conversations to have after, maybe somebody stumbles across it, how to be that support for somebody else. And so that's going to be our Think Fast for this week. Check our YouTube channel, Focus Press. When we don't have time for discussions on here, when there's things that come up that we need to discuss beyond the podcast, that's where we're going to put them. And so I think we want to make it something that's really good for parents, but also for individuals struggling as well. And so keep an eye out for that on YouTube, because we do need to get a lot more practical and hands-on on this. We just don't have time right here on the podcast.
That's a great point. Yeah, check us out on YouTube for sure, and we'll try to handle that. And if you got some questions as well surrounding this, please let us know. There's a lot of questions here. This doesn't even begin to touch the tip of the iceberg here as to how much we can get into. But one of the things, and Will, I'm going to kick this to you. One of the things that we hear a lot is the scare tactic approach, let's call it, which is, if you look at pornography, then you know who else looked at pornography? Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right.
And so we really try to scare people out of porn addiction by pointing to the worst of society, to the rapists, to the people like that, and say, they started with pornography as well, and that might be you. Or the child predators, right? Well, they got into pornography. Yes, technically, but correlation doesn't equal causation, I would say, in this case. But, Will, I want to kick that to you. What do you say to those who point to Ted Bundy and say, well, my kid or my husband or this person is going to be like that if they view porn?
Well, is it not similar to, sometimes the preaching tactics of, well, we just need to, throw hell at them, as far as describing the horrors of hell and really scare them out of that so that they'll become Christians, and I don't want to say there's no value in that, but if somebody's becoming a Christian just because they want to stay away from hell and there's no other reason to it, that's not a great reason, right? We need to understand the gospel as more of, well, I'm not going to go to hell, so I guess I'll, you know what I mean? The scare tactics there sometimes are not the best tactics as far as preaching the gospel there. When it comes to this one, the scare tactic of, well, you're going to turn out like Ted Bundy or you're going to turn out like Jeffrey Dahmer, again, just the common sense of looking at the statistics and saying there are millions, if not, hundreds of millions of porn addicts, and how many Ted Bundys were there? How many serial killers are out there? To me, it's such a poor tactic when you're jumping to the absolute worst extreme on any issue here, but especially with this one when, Joe, you've had more experience as far as a therapist in here. I think you would probably agree the scare tactics don't work, right? The jumping to the extreme as far as, you're going to turn out like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, it doesn't work. We might think that we're doing kids a favor when we're jumping to that extreme and trying to scare them with it, but it doesn't work. Again, you just look at the statistics. You got a congregation of 250 members. What is it? 180 of them statistically, 150 of them are statistically struggling with it if the statistics are accurate. And so, there aren't millions of serial killers out there. There aren't hundreds of millions of Ted Bundys out there. And so any kid with common sense is going to look at that and say basically, well, you're just trying to scare me. That's not true. That's not actually going to happen. Jack, what do you have to add on to that?
Well, the other thing is, if somebody's been fighting this battle for 10 years, right, and they get told, well, that was the path for Ted Bundy, serial killers or criminals or whatever, scare tactic you want to throw at somebody, and they can go, okay, well, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've never been drawn to hit somebody, kill somebody, run over somebody, eat somebody. I mean, like all these horrible things that you can give them and say, man, this is what could happen, and go, well, it hasn't happened to me, so it must not be that bad. You can kind of downplay it. Well, I'm not Ted Bundy, and so maybe I've got a milder case of it, and that kind of keeps you from addressing it for as bad as it really is, right? And so when you make it this extreme of this is the path to being a serial killer, well, no, it's not. As you said, statistically, it's not for 99.9999%. And so then when somebody hears that as an addict themselves, they go, okay, well, I'm not that one. I'm not the real bad one, and so this isn't such a big deal, and maybe makes them put it off. Maybe makes them not address it because, I'm not Ted Bundy.
And relating it to the Ted Bundys of the world, what does that tell the 13-year-old sitting in the audience? Yeah, I'm going to come forward with my porn struggle because you're going to think I'm Ted Bundy. You're going to freak out and tell me that I'm going to start killing people. So, no, I don't think I'll come forward with this. So, does it work? It works, or it serves to keep people quiet. That's how it works. It is a terrible tactic that keeps people in shame. It keeps them in the shadows, keeps them in the dark, because they don't want to come out and be equated with Jeffrey Dahmer. They don't want to come out and be equated with Ted Bundy. Nobody would want that. If you'd said, you know who else gossips? Hitler gossiped too. And, yeah, then you think people would be coming forward with gossiping? Because you'd go, oh, I don't want to be Hitler. There's a little bit more to it, okay? The guy is clearly not right in the head. They can point to Ted Bundy. They're psychopaths. They're sociopaths. They're messed up individuals. In, again, Will, your point, there are millions and millions and millions of porn addicts around the world right now that have never dreamed of raping somebody, okay? Please stop using this as a scare tactic to get people out. It simply does not work. I've had clients, again, as I've referenced, in their 70s who for 50 plus years have been porn addicts, and they have looked at porn and they have masturbated, and it has stayed to that. That can't happen. So please stop telling people that if you stay in it long enough, you will naturally turn into a serial killer.
Jack, unless you have anything else to add to that, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next question, I guess, topic that we have, and it's one. Hopefully, you heard what we started with at the beginning, when you're talking about. This is a sensitive topic. This is something that maybe the youngest of ears don't really need to hear, and so we're about to get into one of those. So again, if you didn't hear that, just go ahead and plan on covering the kids' ears or whatever. But we want to address just some of these terms that are associated with pornography, and masturbation is one of them. And the question, I guess, is we're trying to put these in forms of questions that maybe that the average day or average man has. I'll kick it to these guys when it comes to how do we talk to our kids? How do we answer? How do we navigate this concept of masturbation? Maybe masturbation without porn, masturbation that leads to porn. Guys, again, this is one that, talk about a taboo word, talk about a taboo subject. It's one that doesn't really get addressed. It's one that there's probably a lot of Christians, a lot of, again, just average Christians out there that are wondering, what's the teaching tactic here? What is the parenting tactic here? If you're an individual, if you're somebody who is struggling with this, again, with or without porn, what are the answers here? So Jack, not to put you on the spot with maybe one of the toughest questions that we've got, but what do you have to say to this topic?
We actually received a question on this after our masculinity episode, when we talked about kind of the sexaholic, the sexualized version of men that culture puts forward. And it just kind of brings that realization of, man, we don't talk about this, but it is something that is a question. It's something that is a factor in life, especially with pornography being so widespread and this issue that we're talking about. And so, yeah, we got to talk about it. And number one, obviously what Jesus says, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, then you're committing adultery in your heart. So that is a really big factor. But, somebody can say, well, I can do it without lusting. Well, I think, Joe, the question you ask is, can you do it when you're thinking about the paint on the wall? No, there's almost always a sexual element to this. And not only that, but there's principles you can take out of this. Biblically, sex is between a married man and a married woman married to each other. That's the only bounds for it. And so you've got, these Bible verses that give lists of sins, of sensuality, licentiousness, things like this. I think that it kind of can fall under that broader category. But the other side of it is how bad masturbation is for you as a person. You hear a lot of talk about dopamine, right? And I'll let Joe get into this more because, this is kind of your wheelhouse, your expertise. But it's in the same way with like video games, of it gives you this sense of conquest when you didn't actually do anything. It gives you a sense of sexual satisfaction when you didn't actually do anything. And so it leads to depression. Like, it leads down this road. And so because we've got a porn addicted society, a masturbation addicted society, all the bad things that we get ourselves into as a society, and then the depression sets in, it's another side effect of this, of constant dopamine hits that are totally unearned. And so, your subconscious knows that's not real, but, you're still going for it because it feels good, and you get that dopamine hit, and it just messes you up. Your whole wiring goes up, and as a human being, it takes away your incentive to go and actually do things in the real world.
it takes what is intended to be between two people, the most intimate thing between two people, their sexuality, and it individualizes it. So no wonder why it leads to depression, because masturbation is lonely. It is again taking what God created for two people and making it one. And the thing that I struggle with, so first off, I agree very much with you, Jack. I don't think it's right. If you can masturbate without, I get more power to you, I guess. I can't think of anybody who actually can. Anybody that I talk to, that's the case. Now, there are such things as wet dreams that I think it's your body's natural release, that if it's building up or whatever, and a lot of teenage boys can get that. But it is a cheap form of what God intended to be between a married woman. And the interesting thing is when you study this, you realize for those that are porn addicts and for those that even just masturbate, you can do it multiple times a day. And again, this is a sensitive subject, but we're here, so might as well discuss it. You can do it multiple times a day. Now, for the married couples, most married couples do not have sex multiple times a day, because the sex is very fulfilling. It is on a completely different level. And you say, well, it's all sexuality, it's all the same. No, it's not. Specifically when it's attached to pornography, as you mentioned, Jack, the dopamine hit, the spike that you get, it's supernormal stimuli. So pornography it really hijacks the brain, and no real woman can live up to what porn provides through its novelty and through its ability to always come back for more, and something different and something escalated. That doesn't happen with a real woman. But even for those that just masturbate, fantasies, sexual fantasies, they're very dangerous, because they also put women in compromising positions. It's also lust of the heart. There's all sorts of things that go into that yes, teenage boys may very much struggle with it. They may very much want to do it. In my opinion, I think sex is, as I'm sure I've mentioned on here before, the pinnacle of intimacy. And I think masturbation, those who are in a lot of strong relationships, and I'm talking, male relationships of being one of the guys and having accountability partners and having people that care about them. And really, when their emotions are taken care of, they don't want to masturbate as much. And that sounds really ridiculous, but I'm telling you, in my experience and from the work that I do with guys, that bears out. That when you really connect to those around you, your sexual drive goes down. Well, that tracks with what happens in marriage. When you connect with your wife, your sexual drive actually goes down. You don't need sex 3, 4, 5 times a day the same way you needed to masturbate 3, 4, 5 times a day. The emotional reasons are really what takes care of it. Or the emotional needs. So that's what I'd say about the masturbation discussion is, no, I don't think it's right. I think it's very emotion driven, and if you can fix that, and if you can help your teenage boy, because it's not a teenage problem, but that's mainly where it comes from, is, well, what about the teenagers' raging hormones? I still think a lot of it has to do emotionally. People may disagree, and that's okay, but Jack, you had another thought.
C.S. Lewis had a really good piece on this, and what he talked about is that you can kind of, as you said, the fantasies, you can have this mental harem, right? And they don't require anything of you. They never get on your nerves. They're always there for you, as you said, all of these things. And so, number one, it's telling you don't need your wife, or if you're single, that you don't need a wife, because you can just handle this on your own. And so you've got this thing set aside, and you never have to work for it, and you never have to compromise with somebody else, and do the kinds of things as a husband and a wife, as a man and a woman, of working towards that goal together. Because I've just got it on my own. And he finishes his section, and you can Google it. It's pretty short, but he has some really good things to say in it. But he says, after all, almost the main work of life is to come out of ourselves, out of the little dark prison we are all born in. Masturbation is to be avoided, as all things are to be avoided which retard this process. The danger is that of coming to love the prison. And man, the idea of loving the prison that you're in, does that describe the day that we live in, of getting locked into this, and you think, man, this is great. I got porn out. This makes me happy, and it's ruining you. But boy, you really love it. You really enjoy it. It feels good. That dopamine hit keeps coming, and so it is about coming out of ourselves. And this, more than anything, drives us into ourselves. And there's a lot of negative side effects. We don't really have time for it here, but socially, relationally, the stuff comes out of this that affects you in ways you don't even realize.
Well, we haven't even gotten into the neurological side of it, of the way it can affect your brain, or the way I should say that it does affect, not can affect, the way that it does affect your brain, the way it rewires it and creates neurological pathways and can really set you up for struggles within marriage. Again, we haven't really touched on that yet, but as far as creating expectations, creating unfair expectations for your spouse that, as I think Joe's brought up before, it can't be met 100% of the time. And so it's dangerous. It's dangerous when you have those expectations, when you have those fantasies that you're continuing to indulge yourself in, and then your spouse comes along 2 or 3 years later, and again you're set up for struggles. I'm not going to say you're set up for failure, but you're set up to struggle quite a bit. And this is why the communication channels, once again, not to keep beating the dead horse, but they have to stay open. You have to be willing to acknowledge the fact that, yes, this is rewiring my brain. This is something that, again, from the individual perspective, you get some help. And again, we're going to get into that a little bit later on as far as, or maybe in the Think Fast episode, about the best methods. But it's very dangerous. It's rewiring brains, left and right.
If anybody wants, if they reach out and they would like my slides, I have an entire 5-part presentation seminar on pornography, and I take a lot of time to talk about the toll on the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, and the physical of how porn and even masturbation really affects it. And to your point, Will, about the brain, and Jack, you had mentioned it, and I didn't get too much into the brain science. I have several slides specifically on that. It's very fascinating. We're not getting into any of the neurochemicals. We're not getting into CREB. We're not getting into delta phos B. We're not getting into... We've briefly discussed dopamine, how it affects the prefrontal cortex and the logical part of the mind, how it kind of starts cutting off the logical part of the mind. It grows other aspects of the brain that are more impulsive. So yeah, there's so much that goes to this, but ultimately masturbation is lonely. It is an individualized version of something that was not intended to be individualized, in my opinion. A lot of people think that's what Jesus is talking about, and cutting your right hand off and throwing it from you in Matthew 5, along with taking out your right eye, with what makes you lust. And a lot of people think that he's kind of tongue-in-cheek, so to speak, referencing masturbation. I don't know if that's true or not, with the right hand being mentioned there. But at the same time, all I know is the principle there of don't lust is very much appropriate at this masturbation time. So, fellas, I want to kick this to you. We want to move through into, okay, we hear it's bad, it's not good, statistically it's horrible, well, okay, we're not supposed to masturbate, we're hearing all of these things. We also know we're supposed to teach our kids how to handle it and keep them from it. What methods do we use? What's the best way to combat pornography temptation here? So we're talking maybe content filters, we're talking accountability partners. Jack, I'll throw it to you. What would you say to the average guy who says, man, how do I keep my family safe? How do I keep myself safe on this?
One thing is access. Married couples, this is something that's kind of common. Of you've got your phone, I've got mine, and man, if your husband or if your wife is just really kind of dodgy with their phone, kind of squirrely, never lets it out of their pocket, never lets it out of their possession. On the other hand, I mean, like, if your relationship is so bad that you need to be checking their phone 3 times a day, and all right, what you've been looking at, that's not a good thing. There's a lot to address there. But if somebody is so overly guarded and protected of their phone, and the same goes for your kids. We spoke last time about kids and smartphones, and boy, we're not real high on the idea, but as a parent, that's your choice. If you made that choice, you need to have access to your kid's phone. You need to make sure that you have the passwords, you can turn things on and off, parental locks. Take the time to learn the parental controls on their phone, number one. Number two, software. Covenant Eyes, I think it's $120 a year, Joe, something like that.
Something like that. $16 a month.
It's a great software. And you can put it across your devices. They've got a tablet one, a phone one, iOS, Android, your computer, Mac, or PC. Put that on there. Make sure you know what's going on in your house. Make sure those reports are getting sent.
Hold your thought there real quick,
yeah,
Jack.
Go ahead.
Let me speak to Covenant Eyes real fast before we move from that. To everybody listening, no, I'm not a paid spokesperson for Covenant Eyes, but I do think that it is the best you can get. I'm aware of so many others, Canine Protection. I mean, I run across these all the time. Please get Covenant Eyes. It has screen capture technology. If you throw a DVD in there, it will screen capture it. Whether you're using Wi-Fi or not, it will continue to monitor and screen capture and send those screen captures to accountability partners. It also uses a VPN on its phones. where it's much more difficult to get around. No backdoor apps. Oh, I just downloaded Chrome instead of Safari on my iPhone. It'll still track that as well. It'll take screen capture if you use their specific Covenant Eyes app. It will take screen captures on iOS devices as well, and I think Android devices. So there's multiple reasons to use it. Yes, it's expensive. Use it. You can go with XXX Watch, things like that. It's free. That's great. If you really want to get out of pornography, I would strongly, strongly recommend Covenant Eyes for those reasons. It is, in my opinion, way far ahead of any other thing that I have run across in terms of its functionality and what it can do. Sorry, Jack. Keep going.
No, that's great. And there is a cost, it's $10-12 a month. This is your soul we're talking about. Your kids' souls, maybe your spouse's soul. Like, make this commitment. If you're, as Joe mentioned earlier, a lot of husbands and fathers have this, and so it's not like that they're gonna, have parents that are over them putting the Covenant Eyes on. Put Covenant Eyes on. Have accountability partners. Have somebody at church, an elder, a preacher, somebody you can confess to, and send your emails to them so that they can check in, so that they know. Take these steps, as we talked about earlier. You're never going to block it off 100%. You're not going to make your house airtight against it, but there's no reason to leave these things just kind of sitting out there. And so softwares, parental controls, shared phone passwords, things like that, just so that, because one of the biggest things, and we'll talk about this in a bit, you can't fight this battle on your own. If you're battling it, if your kid is battling it, this is not the worst thing we can do is go, I can do this, because that's what everybody does. That's what the tens of millions of addicts, those that are trying to get out of it, they're all saying, I can do it, and they're not. You need people around, and so using safeguards to set that up for yourself, for your kids, do what you got to do.
My answer as far as this question, what are the best methods to combat the temptation of pornography? Jack and Joe, y'all both spoke very well about the softwares and the, again, kids having smartphones, probably not the best idea. I want to speak more so to a different area here, and that is the fact that you cannot, or please don't be the person that does everything they can to ban the hardcore pornography, but allows the soft pornography into your home. By that I mean, if you're going to go to all the great lengths of the Covenant Eyes and the filters and all these things, but you're going to allow your family or even yourself to watch Netflix shows or Hulu shows or whatever shows that basically have softcore pornography on there, you're not doing yourself a ton of good. Again, sometimes we can think about pornography in the terms of, again, the hardcore stuff, the sleazy website stuff. There's soft pornography going on across all kinds of shows, movies, sex scenes in movies, sex scenes in shows. If you're going to be Mr. and Mrs. Hardcore about the again, the website stuff, the filter stuff, then you better do the exact same thing with, again, what your kids watch. If you're from an individual's perspective, what you watch, right? If you're going to be somebody that says, I want to get out of this, and yet you're still watching some of the shows, some of the movies that have basically this type of stuff in it, you're not doing yourself any favors. And so when it comes to, again, methods to combat this temptation, you got to go at it from all angles. You got to attack it from every way that's entering your home, and it's not just sometimes the websites that you shouldn't be on, or the apps that you shouldn't be on, the OnlyFans type of stuff. You can get it very easily through movies, through shows, and you've got to do your part, again, whether you're an individual or whether you're a parent, to make sure that you're not allowing that you are just as diligent about not allowing that into your home as you are the other websites and things like that. So that's what I would have to add to kind of take a different angle on that. Joe, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, that's such a valuable point, just to reiterate that. Like, yeah, I put Covenant Eyes on my kid's phone, so we're all good, and then we sit down and we watch Game of Thrones, or we watch the new Harley Quinn DC movie, or I allow my son to watch music videos on his phone through Apple Music, and I have no idea what he's watching. All I know is, next thing you know, you see that he's a big fan of Lady Gaga or whatever else. Like, parents, please be aware. We talked about this last week. Please be aware of what's going on. Well, that's such a valuable point of, like, don't think that those things, again, go back to the main definition. Anything that's sexually arousing, images that are intended to be sexually arousing, even the things in the mind, which is going to kind of go into my next point here, but the things of the mind that really capture the emotions, like 50 Shades of Grey. Great, you put content software on there, and you got to make sure that the computer is turned toward the open area where everybody can see it. But you read 50 Shades of Grey. You allow your kid to read some really raunchy material. That's not as good either. Be aware of those things.
Or like what we discussed with the last episode, you go to the beach in July, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So if you can't, here's the last thing I'll say to this before we get into myths and look to wrap it up. If you are struggling with an addiction, pornography addiction, you realize, man, I cannot get around this. I have tried everything. I have taken online courses. I have read all the books. I have talked to people. It is not getting fixed. I'm desperate to get this fixed. What do I do? I have been there. I did take 30-day programs online. I did read a ton of books. I was very well informed on these things. I had talked to people about it sparingly, for sure, but it didn't seem to work. So what this comes down to, what's the best method to combat the temptation of pornography? If you really are addicted, and we're not talking once a month you get on there, that's more behavioral. Put some things on your computer, make sure you avoid it. Understand what emotions are driving you to it. This is an emotional issue, not a behavioral one, if you have an actual addiction to it. Usually it's triggered by trauma, it's triggered by feelings of worthlessness, by all sorts of negative core beliefs of, if they knew the real me, they would reject me, right? They would hate me. So it's driven by shame. And we have a lot of trauma triggers that push us into this, a lot of emotional things. When I'm stressed, I run to porn. When I'm angry, I run to porn. When I'm feeling lonely, I run to porn. If that's the case with you and you're noticing some of these triggers, please get yourself some help. Seek out counseling. That's what I do. I specialize in sex addiction. I have a heart for this because that was me. I was that addict for 10 years. So I understand the struggle. Man, it is a life and death struggle, but please get yourself some counseling. Work through the emotional issues that are driving you to the addiction. All of the negative core beliefs that you're happening to fall into and to believe that's driving you there. Because otherwise, look, putting some accountability software on your computer is fantastic. That's not going to fix your emotional pain if there's trauma that's driving you to the addiction. I've worked with so many people that have been abused, sexually abused, raped, molested, that have been neglected by their parents, that have just had horrible relationships with their parents. A lot of times, if it's a father or if it's a boy, a lot of times it's with the father, where my dad was just not there for me, and they run to pornography because for multiple reasons. Please, please, please get yourself some help. Don't think you're going to do this on your own. And there's no shame, just as there's no shame in coming out and mentioning this, that you have this and seeking help. There's no shame in getting therapy to fix this either. If you really want to get out of it, be willing to do whatever it takes, which may mean paying for therapy. It may mean seeking out somebody else's professional opinion to help you through those things. But those are for the addicted. If it's a one time a month, one time every couple months, I think the other things, the software. The last point I'll make, and I think we're going to get in, this will transition into the next one, is we've talked a lot about, can we do this alone? And so I'm going to kick off with kind of the first myth here, which is, well, I can just fix this on my own. No, you can't. We've already said that. You cannot fix this on your own. And because we call this an intimacy disorder. Porn addiction is an intimacy disorder. You lack the ability to connect with other people. Shame pushes you where you don't want to connect to other people. But this is not we call it white knuckle change, right? If I squeeze my hands, squeeze my knuckles really, really hard and say, I'm never going to do this again. Tried that, been there, done that. So has every one of my clients that come to see me. They've all tried those things and it doesn't work because it's an intimacy disorder. You have to learn to get connected with others, to work through your emotional issues that keep you from connecting to others. So as far as it goes with accountability, please seek accountability, but accountability is not intended to be a slap on the wrist. Oh, I fell again. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we'll be praying for you. Talk to you next week. That's not accountability. That's not really anything. Accountability is somebody who's there where you call them in the heat of the moment when you're really wanting it, or you call them after and they say, okay, man, what went wrong? How did you access? What were you feeling at the time? What triggered you? What are we going to do to make sure that's not a trigger again? That's accountability. Somebody who walks alongside you. And you know what that also is? It's intimacy. And that may not be a term we're comfortable with because we associate it with sex. But at the end of the day, that is intimacy. That is knowing and being known. That is vulnerability and authenticity. And they're doing that for you. They're allowing you to do that, and they're being that with you. So real accountability is somebody who doesn't just hold your feet to the fire and scold you every time you fall to where you're always in this shame cycle. It's somebody who walks alongside you and gives you what you're desperately needing, which is connection, unconditional love. Somebody that says, man, I see you at your worst and I love you. You're worthwhile. You're worthy of love. All of those things, and really helps you there. So that's the way I would answer that first myth, which is, I can do this on my own. Please don't even try to do it. If you can, good for you. I still think you're missing out on what this is all about, which is really driving you more toward individuality, kind of the masturbation thing. This is not an individual thing. It needs to be solved through connection. Fellas, what would you say to that? I know that's a long thing, but what would you add to that first myth?
Well, to me, I think you can go into just about anything that you struggle with. There's a reason why Paul, or throughout the New Testament, we see the commands: confess your sins one to another, bear each other's burdens. You're not really intended to face problems alone. Whether that be a pornography addiction, whether that be just a struggle with lust. Maybe you've never looked at pornography, or you don't touch it at all, but you struggle with lust. Maybe again, you struggle with gossip, you struggle with whatever it may be. We're not called to run the Christian race alone, as we've discussed before. There are commands in Scripture: confess your sins one to another, bear each other's burdens. And so with any issue, Joe, you already said it very well, but with anything that you're struggling with, you really were not intended to fight against it alone, just to bury it within and say, well, I'll just pull myself up by my bootstraps and figure out how to get through it. That's not really the way that God designed us. That's not really the way that God designed the church. And so that, of course, certainly plays in, with the pornography and lust issues as well. But I wanted to point that out because, again, just about any issue that you're going to face, you're going to struggle with, you need to have people that you can go to and talk to about it and communicate about it. Jack, do you have anything else?
Well, this will go, I guess, with the next myth we're going to get into. We'll kind of merge these two. You're exactly right about confessing our sins to one another, and that's why the church has to do so much of a better job of getting this out there, because nobody is going to walk forward in front of 150 people on Sunday and say, I need prayers for my pornography addiction. Okay?
Especially when you consider that porn is kind of the taboo sin at this point, right?
It is. He struggles with what? Oh, wow. I would have never guessed him. It's like, as we're about to look at statistically, you shouldn't be surprised. But it's not everybody's business. That's not accountability either, because if you tell the whole church and everyone says, we'll pray for you, and there's nobody following up, that's not good either. And so what the church needs to do, number one, is talk about it more. Talk about it from the pulpit of, we expect this to be a problem, and so we're going to talk about it. We're not going to hide from it. We're not going to say, well, this is something that only like weird people struggle with. No, this is something that the people here struggle with. In the same sense that we need to tell people here about gossip, and the same people here about anger and about any other sin that we talk about. And so, number one, talk about it more from the pulpit, not just in passing. Have a sermon on it or bring it up. Number two, put that accountability mechanism in place. Be like, you know what, we're going to talk about it from up here. We know you don't want to come down in front of everybody, but there's your elders, or here's your minister, or here's some other brothers who are involved. Call one of them. Take them out to lunch. Pull them aside and say, I need to talk about the problem. Like, make the avenue there for that, because
foster an atmosphere where that is available.
Right. Like, show people the next step. Because you can tell somebody fighting it alone is not going to work. Okay, but literally the hardest thing you're ever going to do is tell somebody who you care about, somebody you respect, somebody in your church, you're an elder, a minister, whoever, to go up and say, man, I've got a pornography problem. Because especially if you don't know how they're going to react. If there's that chance that they're going to go, oh no, you what? Oh, get away from me, you unclean.
Ted Bundy?
Yeah, you're just like Ted Bundy, like if you're going to get that from somebody, and so you don't know. So create an atmosphere into where you say, you know what, this is a struggle that's all too common, more common than you think. We've got this where, there's judgment in the sense we're not going to say it's right. We're going to tell you that it's wrong, but you already know that. But it's not going to be a condemnation. We're here to help you through it rather than look in shock, look down on you, anything else. And so to Will's point about bearing one another's burdens and confessing sins to one another, that needs to happen, and as the church, we need to help facilitate that to the best of our ability, which leads to this next myth, Joe. I'll tee you off for it. A lot of people think that as we talk about this, okay, but yeah, that's the world. This doesn't affect the church. In the church, we know that this is wrong, so we just don't do it. Not true. Go get into why that is one of the biggest mistakes we make. Absolutely.
Let me throw on, I meant to say this right at the end. As far as accountability partner goes, if you have been chosen as an accountability partner and somebody comes to you, this is the last thing I'll say about it, and I am guilty of this as well. I feel horrible sometimes at the way I do this. It is a struggle to remember. Please set yourself some alarms to reach out to your guys and say, hey, man, how's it going? Because it's so easy to get going and then let a month go by and then be like, I'm so sorry, man, I forgot. I recently did that with somebody, so that happens, and I feel horrible about it. And don't do that. Don't be like me. Please set the alarms, reach out regularly, and let them know that, man, you care about them, you care about their sin. Let me get into some statistics here. 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women watch porn at least once a month. This is all self-reporting, by the way. Of young Christian males age 18 to 24, 76% regularly seek out porn.
Over 3 and 4.
Yeah. One of the most comprehensive studies done in Christendom, which again is not Church of Christ, but Church of Christ is woefully lacking on getting accurate statistics on things like this. But it was a 2014 study done by Barna, which was also paid for, I think, with Covenant Eyes. They kind of did the study together, found that 55% of Christian married men admit to viewing porn at least once a month. Of those claiming to be born again, 54% of young Christian males age 18 to 30 looked at porn monthly, and 14% for women. But of those that were kind of a loose term, loose Christianity, 77% of men 18 to 30 looked at porn, and 36% for women. A lot of informal surveys find that number to be around 50. If I was going to guess, personally, I think the number is somewhere around 2 out of every 3. I think it's 65-ish percent.
And the minister
66%.
number is incredibly high as well.
51% of
members,
pastors
but-
say internet
yeah.
pornography is a possible temptation. And 59% of pastors say that married men seek their help for porn use. So 7% of Christian women view porn weekly. That's trending upward. It would not surprise me if that number has risen to about 10%. 1 in 10 are viewing it weekly of women. Here's the shocking number, though. Here's the thing, and this is what Barna found. 93% of pastors see porn as an increasing problem in the church. You guys want to guess how much, what the percentage is for how many have a plan to deal with it? 7.
Wow.
7% have a plan to deal with it. 93% say, yeah, it's a problem. It's getting worse. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? I have no idea. 7% do. So this speaks to the problem of, we don't realize how prevalent this is in our church. We almost track perfectly with the culture. Yes, the culture does a little bit more, of course. And the lowest statistic...
hold on. We just threw a lot of stats at people. Just contextualize it. What that tells you is if you have a church of more than 6 people, it is a virtual guarantee that somebody there struggles with it. And even if you have a church of 6 people, there's a real good chance that somebody does. But
Right.
a church of any size whatsoever, not one, multiple people struggle. If you're a church that's in the hundreds of attendance, dozens of people have this struggle. Every young boy in your youth group potentially could struggle with this. A third of the girls in your youth group could potentially struggle with it. I mean, let's put real names and faces on this. Look around you, and not in an accusative way. Well, maybe it's him, maybe it's her. No, but just realize this struggle this hits home. This matters to us. This is in this room with us, and we got to do something about it.
So let's say conservatively, let's take the conservative statistic of 50%. Again, this is self-reporting. That's why, for those that are curious, if you ever look up, porn addiction is only at 5 to 7%. There's no such thing as porn addiction in the DSM. I've talked about this before. I think the DSM is ridiculous that's not in there. But when you see 5 to 7% of addiction statistics, those are people saying, yes, I'm absolutely addicted. Self-reporting addiction. All of these numbers take into account self-reporting, that there's going to be a lot of people, in my opinion, and in Christendom, that aren't going to necessarily tell the full truth about it. That personally, so I think the 50% is very low, especially with the guys that this is what I do, and I run across this a lot. And so, yes, you have a church of 200 members. Let's just split it, 50-50, 100 men. Statistically, on the lower end, 50% of men, a quarter of your church, is struggling with pornography. Throw in the women's side of it, which I think is probably upwards of 10%. Again, anywhere up to 33% for the younger age, definitely up to that side. But let's just say 10% of the 100, so another 10. So you got 60 people out of a 200-member congregation struggling with porn, and that's once a month. That's not occasionally. That's at least once a month, and even up to once a week. That's a lot. If you had 60% of people in your church that you knew struggled with any other sin, do you think we'd be silent on that?
Right.
Do you think we'd have 7% of preachers and pastors who have an idea of how to handle it? Or do you think we'd go, this is a really big problem. We probably need to do something about this?
I want to merge this with another myth because we're running short on time, but these go together really well, is how many people say, not my kid. Oh, it's not my house. I've got a good kid. Yeah, you have a good kid. Because you're accepting that framing that anyone who struggles with this is a monster. Rather than thinking of them as a human being. human beings, especially male human beings, have sexual urges. They have a culture that is pushing sexual urge material right in front of their faces all the time, addicting them, pulling them in, their friends, their phones, all these opportunities they have, and all these Christian parents, oh, no, not my kid. My kid is a good kid. They wouldn't do that. They're human. And so, number one, stop looking at people who fall for this as less than human. Number two, realize your own kids are human and are going to need help with this as well, because that's something I know you have run into a lot, and I've heard the same thing. Oh, no, we don't have to worry about that. We talked to them. We told them that, or even we told them if they ever look at it, we're going to kill them. Like, oh, that helps. So if they ever struggle, they know not to confess.
Definitely
to you.
not coming to you.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so, realize this is a very human problem, and your children are human too.
Essentially what you're saying is stop burying your head in the sand about it. Whether you're a parent, and Joe, that stat that you read about 7% of, and obviously that is, not Church of Christ, that's, other denominations, but still the fact that 7% of the ministers or pastors or whatever word we want to use don't really have a plan to deal with it is alarming, especially when you consider the stats we started with, which is how many people struggle with it and how accessible it is. And so just to elaborate.
Sorry, not to cut you off.
Yeah,
this may sound mean. You talk about Church of Christ, it's lower in the Church of Christ.
Yeah,
I can almost guarantee you it's lower, because in Christendom is where you find all of the resources for this. How many Church of Christ books have you read on pornography?
Crickets. Zero, yeah.
Crickets, which is why I'm working on one right now. Just plug myself there for a second, or plug my book. But sorry, I'll let you keep talking.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, to elaborate more on Jack's point, just stop burying your head in the sand, whether you're a parent, whether you're a minister or an elder, especially if you're an elder who is still living in the 70s and 80s, as far as you don't understand truly how accessible it is and how big of a problem it is. Your, not to call elders out here, but your role as a shepherd, your role as an elder, watching over the spiritual health of your flock, is to develop a plan for this, is to develop a strategy, is to develop here's how we're going to address it. Here's how we're going to help those who are already struggling. That falls on you. If you're a minister, if you're a preacher, that falls on you to address these issues, and not to address them in a, we'll just stop type of way or just get over it type of way, but in a practical terms of this is how we can handle this type of stuff. And if you're not doing that, again, not to throw you under the bus, but shame on you. You should be doing that. And again, with Jack's point on the parent thing, not my kid. Typically the people that say, well, not my kid would never struggle with that. Newsflash, their kids probably are struggling with that. Yeah. The ones they're very quick to say, well, that's other people's kids. Those aren't my kids. Your kid probably is struggling with it. So don't be that person. Educate yourself. If this is all news to you, like, wow, I didn't know it was this bad. Maybe you should start reading some books. Maybe you should start doing some research and learning some things about truly how dangerous it is. But sorry to Joe, you can keep going. I just wanted to elaborate there on Jack's point.
It's the same people. Well, it's not my school, right? For public school, yes, your school. Okay, please, people, wake up. All right, these things are real problems. Yes, your school. Yes, your kid. And that's what I always told them. Not my kid. Yes, your kid. Like, I've worked with so many that's like the parents are just absolutely shocked, and you start digging into it and it's like, holy smokes, no wonder why you struggle with this issue. Like, how could you not? So your kid has emotional struggles. Your kid has he's human, Jack. To your point, I want to hit the last two though here. One of the things we run into with spouses, one of the things we talk about is the three different discoveries. Discovery one, the wife is usually just shocked. She's sad. She's just very much in shock. How I'm really saddened by this, that you would do this, that you would choose this. Discovery number two, they find it again. Now I'm angry. You told me you would never look at this again. What's wrong with you? How could you do this to me? How could you lie to me? You told me that this wasn't a problem, that it wouldn't be a problem. By the time they discover the third time, we're talking PTSD, and it's, when's the shoe going to drop? When's the next shoe going to drop, right? When am I going to find it again on his phone? How many more times is he going to lie to me? And so, yes, there are strong PTSD responses to this that a lot of spouses don't understand, that the wife is living in a constant heightened state, we call it vigilance, right, of hyper aware of everything around her, of what her husband might be doing, constantly checking his phone, constantly checking the internet. That's PTSD response. It's like a kid that gets in a car wreck and constantly looks over his shoulder because he's scared that there might be a car wreck again. It's vigilance. Hypervigilance is what we call it. So for the spouses, it is not, this is the myth, is my spouse looks at porn, or my husband watches porn because I'm not attractive enough. That is not true. He looks at porn because he's got his own emotional issues that he's running to porn for. It has nothing to do with attraction to you. This is why when your husband says, I find you so beautiful, you go, how could it possibly be? You're looking at these women on the internet. he's looking at them to fulfill his own emotional needs, not because of their attraction and your lack of attraction, but because he has found that that's where he runs to when he's stressed or when he's angry or when he's triggered by his trauma, when he's feeling useless, when he's feeling worthless, when he's feeling low self-esteem, all of those things. Okay? It is not because you are not attractive enough. And fellas, just to wrap up, I think we're going to move out of that unless you have anything to add to that. To this last myth, which is, I'm not worthy of love as a porn addict. The reason I want to throw this on there, the guys asked me, what myths, and this is something I work in, and again, I have my presentation on this, and we talk about a lot of myths. I thought about leaving this one off, but I said, this is really at the heart of it. I think this is why I wanted this to kind of wrap everything. This is at the heart of porn addiction. I'm not worthy of love as a porn addict. Shame, the shame cycle. It's, I look at porn, so I feel horrible about myself. When I feel guilty, I feel shame, which is, guilt is, I'm not a good person. Shame, or guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is, I'm a bad person, right? So we look at porn, we feel guilt, it turns into shame, and then we say, man, I really need something to come out of it. I need to feel better about this, and so we run back to porn, right? We stay in the shame cycle, and grace is what breaks this. Recognizing that we are worthy of love, that Christ, he's what made us worthy of love, not something that we do ourselves. He's the one that said, man, I love you. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He showed that he loved us when, in my opinion, we're not worthy of it. But he says, you are worthy of my love. I make that decision, not you. And that's what helps us break free from this. What helps us break free from the shame cycle and from pornography is getting out of this thinking of, man, I've just done too much. I'm too sinful. There's too much shame attached to this. Christ died for that too. And so I'll say this before I kick it out, and I'm going to wrap here. One of the questions, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, one of the questions that I always ask my porn addicts, when does God love you more? When you're looking at porn or when you're worshiping him in church? And man, I get so many wrong answers. Well, when I'm at church, and that's not true. He loves you the same. In both situations, he loves you to the maximum. Now, he may be disappointed you're looking at porn, no doubt. There's the holiness of God, there's the wrath of God on sin, but overall, I think he looks at you and he says, man, I'm sorry that Satan duped you into thinking that's what you need, because what you need is me. And so we have to stop looking at God as, man, he's about to zap me if I look again. We have to say, he's offered grace for this. He's loved me through my entire addiction, and at my very worst, he loves me. And that is something that we can build on as a foundation for an addict. Fellas, I'll let you take it out.
And that's something that, at the end of the day, can go great lengths to pulling somebody out of this temptation, or out of this addiction, I should say, is understanding that, God's love, the love of God, the grace of God, once you look at porn, it doesn't disappear, right? It doesn't go away, in the sense that it's not a conditional love, a conditional grace. Well, as long as you don't look at porn, then I'm going to love you, right? As long as you don't look at porn, then I'm going to offer this grace. That's not true. Obviously, as we've discussed, porn is dangerous. Porn is a sin. It's an abomination to God. It's something that we should be taking strides, if we struggle with it, to try to avoid and try to overcome, and all these things that we talked about. But it doesn't negate the love of God. It doesn't, again, don't ever think that, well, I've committed the ultimate sin. Again, it's because we view it as the taboo sin, right? We don't want to talk about it because, we're looked at, or people are looked at in such a, I don't know, a taboo type of way again. And so that's not to just completely echo everything that Joe said. I'll kick it to Jack here. But with any issue, with any struggle, there is no amount of sin that you've committed that God's going to look at and say, all right, well, you know what, I've had enough. He or she's out of options here. He or she is, my love meter is used up. I don't have any more love for that individual. And that goes for people as well. So, Jack, what do you have to add to that?
I think a brief overview of the prodigal son says it all. Number one, the prodigal son gave up all of his pride. I'll go home as a slave. I'll be the least man in the house. If he were worried about preserving his self-image, he never would have gone back. It was when he had hit rock bottom. And I think the pride has to get out of the way. You say, well, I'm not worthy of love, or what are people going to think? Or you can't control what people think. You have to get to the point where being right with God and being in your Father's house matters more to you than retaining your status. If he had thought, man, what is my brother going to say? He never would have gone home, because of course his brother wanted to kick him out. His brother didn't want him back. Why are we rejoicing over this sinner? And so you can't think about, well, if other Christians here, what's going to go on? And so realizing your father wants you back. Your father doesn't want you back crawling in as the lowest slave. He's going to bring you back as a full son. He's going to bring you back with the full love. He's going to run and embrace you. And so worry about that. That's what you need more than anything else. But if you're trying to hold on to your pride, if you're trying to walk in and I still want to be well thought of, don't worry about that. Worry about the Father loving you. If he loves you, you got it taken care of. And so don't worry about controlling your self-image. Don't worry about who hears and who might do the, oh, I can't believe he struggles with that. Don't worry about the older brothers who are going to look down and say, why are we celebrating this guy? He's a messed up pervert. Don't worry about that. Worry about the Father's response. The other thing I'm going to say, and this is one that has kind of been, we know pornography is bad. Everyone knows that's bad. As Will talked about earlier, okay, but you can say, well, I'm not watching porn. I'm not pulling up those websites, but you're watching movies you shouldn't watch. You're watching TV shows you shouldn't watch. Then maybe you go, man, I shouldn't be watching these things. You shouldn't do these things. But then you go to Walmart and you're checking out all the legs, all the body parts, people walking by not wearing enough clothing. And it's easier to think that one's okay because it's just everywhere. It's all around you. It's not just not doing something. It's running to be a man of virtue. It's running to be a Job who says, I will not look upon a virgin. David says, I will set no worthless thing before my eyes. Joseph, how can I sin against the Lord in this way? This is the right thing. And so determine to develop a positive ideology of sex, of lust, of all these things we've talked about, rather than just, I'm not going to look at porn. Because you can say, I'm not looking at porn, and leave a wide field of sin and say, well, I'm still doing okay. No, strive for virtue, strive for honor, strive for godliness here, and man, you just start to see the ugliness of the other side.
Run towards some, not away.
Yeah, we say that all the time. It's way better motivation. It's really, as long as you're running away, you'll never outrun something. You're just going to get tired, and then you're going to fall. So run towards something. That's a great way to say it.
All right, with that, fellas, any last thing that you want to add?
I don't think so.
All right, I think
Again,
that's gonna
remember
wrap.
to check out the Think Fast. We're going to get to the practicals. We're going to get to
Absolutely.
what discussions to have with your child, or if you're struggling with yourself, the words to say, the things like that, things to look out for on your phone, all that. We're going to get into that more on Think Fast. So be sure to check that out if you want more information on all of this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack. And with that, we will wrap it up.